Welcome to Resilient. Hosted by Matthew Mingy, Resilient is a podcast about hope, transformation, and the redeeming power of God's love. Born out of Matthew's experience in jail ministry, the podcast shares inspiring stories of people who've overcome addiction, incarceration, and despair through Christ. Each episode features authentic conversations, powerful lessons, and practical encouragement, all delivered with a warm and approachable tone. The goal is to remind listeners that no one is beyond God's reach and to offer hope for a life of healing, purpose, and resilience. Listeners are invited to join the journey, share the message, and embrace God's grace no matter where they are in life. Hey, welcome back to Resilient, where we share powerful stories of transformation through Christ. Today we sit down with Lance, a man who grew up in two worlds, wearing two masks. One reflected stability, while the other let a young boy's mind run free, searching for identity. His journey led him into addiction, but God had a greater plan. Instead of being consumed by his struggles, Lance found redemption and turned his past into a mission to save lives. This is a story of resilience, grace, and purpose. Stay tuned. You don't want to miss this. Hey Lance, great to have you on a Resilient podcast today. I'd like to kick things off with 20 quick-fire questions to break the ice. Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right. What's your favorite meal?
Chicken tacos.
Beach or mountains?
Beach.
What's a hidden talent you have?
I love to play pool.
Are you a morning person or a night owl?
Definitely morning.
If you could have a superpower, what would it be?
Take addiction away.
Awesome. What's the best book you've ever read?
I would probably have to say The Serpent on the Mount.
The Serpent on the Mount. Okay. I haven't read that. Dogs or cats?
Dogs.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
What's your dream vacation spot?
Germany.
Germany. Okay, awesome. What's a song that always lifts your mood?
I'd probably have to say happy.
Okay, here is 10 a little more serious and reflective questions. What's your go-to Bible verse?
I can't remember the number right offhand, but I know it's in Corinthians. Oh.
Okay. Who's been your biggest cheerleader throughout your life?
I would probably have to say my Aunt Teresa.
What's one word to describe your transformation from who you used to be to who you are now?
Well, biggest word would be driven.
What's your proudest achievement?
Getting a relationship back with my grandbabies.
What's the best piece of advice you've received?
I would probably have to say that no matter how far I've come, I am always teachable.
What's one thing you're grateful for today?
God and recovery.
What keeps you motivated on the tough days?
Waking up every day, doing my recovery readings and prayers.
Okay, who inspires you the most?
My son.
What's a lesson that you've learned the hard way?
I've actually talked a lot about that over the past couple of weeks, is not living in my will.
Last question. What does resilience mean to you?
I can't give up, because if I do, people are going to die.
Yeah, you've bounced back in a big way. So as I felt called to start this podcast, you definitely came to my mind because I got to hear a little bit of your story when we met and your testimony and your transformation. And you know what? It impacted my life. But now other people get to hear this. So I definitely wanted to have you on here so we could share that today. So I just, again, want to thank you for being on here today. And I want to move into just kind of your background story and how you grew up.
Well, it wasn't like I came necessarily from poverty. I was, my mom was the sole provider for me most of my life. I think that the ambition that she had of being a provider was a lot of incentive for me. And being an only child with a mom that worked very hard and two different jobs, she was a very big role model for me. She definitely set some things in stone right out the gate with me. There's going to be times where we fail and we come up short, but we still have to keep going. And, we'd spend weekends and summers with my dad. And that The way that role played out was, my mom's side of the family was the people who had their stuff together. And then every weekend and every summer with my dad was like the black sheep squadron, the biker bar, the partying, the my dad was always there, what he could be. I'm sure that affected me a lot as a child growing up because there was times where he couldn't be there. And with my dad also being a full blown alcoholic, I had a lot of things that I got to see early on, and it not only changed but also uh, kind of warped my perspective on what the family atmosphere was supposed to be like.
Right.
Some divided families, some unhealthy relationship between my mom and dad, and then the split, and then that whole thing, dad being there on the weekends, which he couldn't always be because he worked the bar. As time went on, the older I got, the more I was allowed to be in the bar with him, and hence why I like to play pool.
What
So,
town did you grow up in?
Kansas City, Kansas. So, I would go back home after every other weekend to the more uppity upside of my family. And every weekend and every summer, I got to hang with Dad. And Dad always made sure that I had the material stuff, the go-kart, the bicycles, the playing pool, and a lot of fun times, camping and this and that. But I can tell you that the amount of times that I have seen him drunk or have had to physically drive him home from the bar when he's passed out in the driver's seat, um, when I was 12 years old, and the times I've seen him come stumbling in drunk on the weekend he's supposed to be spending time with me, it really played a big part on my perception of relationship with your parents.
Wow. Okay.
Yes.
You had to
And
grow up kind of quick.
I had to grow up very quick. Yeah. And my mom would always try to keep that leash on me pretty tight, and which I'm very thankful for. But every other weekend, every summer, that was the fun stuff. And not downplaying what my mom's role. Always made sure I got to baseball games. Always made sure that I was in martial arts, going to the pool, going camping, going on float trips. So she was great at making sure that all the normal things that families do was still involved in my life. But there was just that always darker side that drew me towards wanting and craving that relationship with my father for so long.
Okay, so you mentioned being 12 years old, driving him home. Getting a little bit older, did you continue to kind of look up to your father in what he was doing, or did you go a different path?
No, I looked up to him for what he was doing because everybody loved him. He was the life. He wasn't an angry or a stubborn, egotistical drunk. He was a happy drunk, and I could do no wrong in his eyes, whether he was sober or whether he was drunk. And so that was actually a lot of times it was negative activity that I was drawn off of for positive reinforcement.
Okay, so that kind of leads us into, as you get older, what specific challenges or experience led you to struggle or addiction, and potentially incarceration?
As I was growing up, when I had to go back home to mom, I felt like I wore two different masks. I had to portray the good kid and that I hadn't done anything wrong. Living that way and having to wear two masks, be the good kid, and then being the one that could get away with everything on the weekends and the summers with my dad, kind of played into living two different lives. And in doing so, being the popular guy that my dad was, I wanted to be popular. And in order for me to really become popular or become more popular than my dad, I had to get involved with things that were illegal activities, or at least I had learned of them at a very early age.
Right.
And when all that occurs, there was times where the shop out behind my dad's bar, I would go peek through the windows, that these guys were all coming out of this shop all laughing and happy and had energy, but yet they were paranoid at the same time, which I didn't understand until later. That's where a lot of my addiction stemmed. Now, keep in mind that the type of activity I'm talking about, some of that I had already experimented with when I was a child, because I remember, I think I was 7 years old when I first had tried marijuana, and by the time I was 12, I had already figured out about the weed and seeing people with straws in their hands coming out of the bathroom, or sniffing their nose, or the guys out back having a beer but they're smoking weed out back. And I would pick up that little roach, just like kids who experiment with smoking. They always go get mom and dad's cigarette out of the ashtray. I experimented in probably a lot of unhealthy ways, uh, but in the same instance, that was probably the turning point between 7 and 8 years old of that euphoric feeling.
Wow. So, kind of hearing you talk about that, it's almost like you're doing all these things just to be connected to your dad and kind of emulate what he's doing.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I would have hide it from him being out of the age, because I didn't want to disappoint him. But, at the same time, he wasn't able to watch me all the time being behind the bar, and I knew that I could manipulate and get away with stuff at a very early age. I had learned that, and I knew, and my dad was a very avid habitual liar. I'd see him lie to my grandma and grandpa and get away with it, and I thought that was something that was acceptable. About where we were and why we were out so late, and just a lot of different things. And remember too, my dad lived with my grandma and grandpa, because my grandfather had a paper delivery business, and my dad worked for him. So during the summer, I was always working in the warehouse with my grandpa and my dad. And then every night I'd go to bed, and Dad would sneak off to the bar and wouldn't be home till 3, 4, 5 o'clock the next morning, or he'd be passed out in the living room drunk on the floors. There was a lot of different instances like that really came into play. And, I took that as normal, because, I'd hear Grandpa complain about it, and Grandma too. But in the same instance, they loved him no matter what. And so that type of acceptance was kind of where I was, and the mentality of my way of thinking being distorted at that early of an age is what kind of led me to my path. And with everything I had seen and learned over the years, I met a lot of biker people, and they treated me like family, even though they did their dirty deeds off to the side, but they protected me. So it wasn't like they didn't care. They cared enough about me to protect me, and that spoke volumes at a very early age. And so the amount of trust that I had with these people was immense. I could go to them for anything. They knew I wasn't old enough to drink, but if I beat them on a pool table, they'd buy me a Roy Rogers, a mixed drink with cherry syrup and Coke. And that type of thing, going into a child all the way from when I was 5 up till I was about 10 years old. That was the norm. I'd be on the pool table all the time, and
Sounds like this is your family.
yeah, and they did protect me. But in the same instance, as I got older and got into my teenage years, they seen my curiosity and knew me well enough, and knew that I was probably a kid from being around them so much that I'd learned the common sense of keeping my mouth shut. And so that trust got even deeper, even though it was heading in a negative direction. And to the point where, there was a couple guys that frequented there that, taught me to manufacture methamphetamine, the old school red and black was what they called it. And
How old were you when
and
you started learning that practice?
I was probably 17 years old. And that just always resonated with me, because once I had experimented with it, I wanted to learn what it was, how to make it. They don't exactly teach you about all the bad stuff that comes along with that. They teach you about maintaining a level head and trying not to abuse it as much, because it could lead you down a very dark path and get you involved with things you don't want to be involved with, like the law. But they couldn't protect me from that forever because it's the nature of the beast that all comes hand in hand later in life. The more you get involved, the deeper you get, and the more negative atmosphere that you're going to be hanging around in. And but on the other hand, that was worth it to me because when I was the guy that was doing that, making it, and had it, and selling it, and I was like my dad, like a happy drunk. I was a happy, lucky person, and I had a lot of people that really liked me for me, but they liked me even more when I had all this stuff.
You were popular, like that you saw your dad being popular as a younger kid.
Right.
Hmm.
A few years later, when I got hired on as an EMT, I became an EMT intermediate and started working on an ambulance. I had to learn rights. I knew rights and wrongs, but I had to learn rights and wrongs in order to be successful no matter what I did. And that meant hiding my usage when I wasn't working on the ambulance and not going into work high because I didn't want to mess up on somebody's life and have them say it was because of the drugs. I still had to wear that other mask, that persona, being the guy that's trying to do right and do all right, but I had a very dark side, and that was the drugs and alcohol side. I had left my mom's and moved out because she found it. Believe it or not, I was holding a sack of weed for a friend of mine because I knew the guy to get it from, and I was waiting on him to come pick it up. I didn't want to leave it in my car, so I put it in my sock drawer, and the one mismatched sock that I had. And lo and behold, my mom found that mismatched sock.
Oh, thanks, Mom.
Yeah, and I remember getting into a big argument, and I did, decided I was 17, 18 years old, and I moved out. And things were very rocky for many years during that time period. But graduating high school, I managed to graduate from Lansing High School up in Leavenworth, Kansas, and even then, with my dad running a bar and having access to all the alcohol all the time, I was the life of the party on that aspect too. And so I would be the guy that always show up with a trunk full of long neck bottles and bar style cases of beer, and
Right.
I was a provider.
Life of the party.
Yeah. Well, it comes down to the provider aspect. Being the provider that my dad couldn't be. And back then, he didn't make a lot of money working in the bar, and it was hard for him to provide. And he always had to ask grandma and grandpa for money. So I didn't want to be like him, even though I was slowly turning into him. And with that all being said and done, that different lifestyle, I would get my butt chewed for coming home with alcohol in my breath or certain things smelled like bonfire, and she thought it was weed, but I'd convince her it was bonfire. But when she found that mismatched sock, and that kind of made me look like I've been a liar that whole time, and not being able to be forgiven and understood at that point, because my mom to this day has never smoked marijuana, and she and my current stepdad, they don't drink at all. And unfortunately, my father's not here anymore. And but I'm very thankful, that when it was time for him to pass, and I was able to be there, and he got to see me clean and sober. And a couple of days before he passed, he just wanted to tell me how proud he was of me for what I've been able to conquer and make it out.
You were finally that guy. You were kind of trying to be emulating him. And then you became someone completely different, and he saw that as strong.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so you were 20 years old, working in an ambulance, kind of living two different lives. Did it stay that way for long, or did you go more ambulance life or more meth production life?
What more ambulance life? I still partied on the weekends, and I would drink on my days off. And if I had a 3 to 5 day span where I wasn't working, I might go at it a little harder, whether it was cocaine at that time or whether it was pills or weed. But there was always, the alcohol element was always involved. And I worked on the ambulance for almost 8 years, and then Kansas City, Missouri Ambulance Service came over to take over the Kansas City, Kansas area, and we all lost our jobs. And the very first thing I thought of was, well, I know what I can go back to survive. and make money. And I dove in head first and instantly started manufacturing and had people and connections in places where I could get the stuff, where I didn't have to worry about people going and buying it from the CVS's and the Walgreens and every place. And I could get stuff straight from a doc at a pharmaceutical company, and it would be pure form. And I started making some really high quality methamphetamine, and it lasted for probably a good 8 years. And my life was was good for a while, even though I was doing most illegal activities. It was going really well. Not only took that aspect, but was getting heavily involved in a lot of other illegal stuff that came with that lifestyle. Whether it was, guns or people that were stealing or robbing, that I was trading them dope for things. And pretty soon I realized that I was becoming, I like to call it an antiques dealer, because I would have some of the most irregular things come into my possession, whether it be from grandfather clocks or to antique glass or furniture or what have you. And I didn't care where it was coming from, because I liked the old furniture and antiques and stuff like that, because that was, we call that was my tweak. Because when you're on that type of drug, you get stimulated so much, but you want overstimulation. So anytime somebody brings me something new, that's what I wanted, and it was something I didn't have, and I had to have it, and I was going to do whatever it took to get it.
Did
And
all those items kind of fulfill you at that time?
they were filling the void of a lot of different aspects.
And you were never satisfied?
Yeah, and that whole attribute of that type of lifestyle was what I started to interpret later on in my recovery as the land of 10,000 unfinished projects.
It's I have a buddy that leads an addiction recovery group, and we'll talk about this stuff all the time, and he'll say, once I got clean, I looked back at the projects that I thought were awesome, and it's just a bunch of unfinished stuff.
Yeah, it's really that definition of insanity, of doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results, and nothing changes,
Yeah.
So whether I was high or whether I was clean and sober, that statement stays true through everything. And so today, I try not to look at things from that aspect, because that land of 10,000 unfinished projects became a backpack of 50,000 pounds of resentments.
So if I'm doing math right, 28 about when you lost your job as an EMT, and then 8 more years, you're 36-ish, and you have 10,000 unfinished projects.
Oh yeah.
So do you stay in that position for long, and things continue going well, or was there finally a bubble that burst?
Now, through the course of my addiction, would have days where I was sober and wanted to get away from it all, and it would trigger something in me to run, and that's the only thing I knew how to do, because I wasn't involved with the recovery community, and I didn't know there was options, and I didn't know that there was different things out there you could do to deal with these types of situations. I had no idea that I had a problem. I just knew that I didn't want to use, I didn't want to drink, and I wanted something different. I just didn't know how to get there. So I would move to Lake of the Ozarks, and things would be great for 6, 8, 9 months. And then I would run into somebody that I had done something in the past with up here in Kansas City, and then it would go downhill again. And one of the things about that is that, well, if I can't live down here and get away from it, then I might as well move back home. And then the insanity I'd come right back up to Kansas City and would take over again. And there was never a time where I was able to escape from everything, because no matter where I went or what I was doing, I would always run into somebody or something would remind me, and money and times would be hard, and I knew I could go back and just do it one more time, or just make enough just to get some money in the bank and get some things paid off, and things would be all right. But it never ended up being just one more time. And so that actually carried on till I was 38 years old, when I got in trouble the first time I ever ran from the law. Well, I ran from them several times, but there was one time that they gave me a run for my money. And, it was apparently my time to get caught. They chased me. I actually got up into a park and hit a firearm and the amount of dope I had on me, but I forgot about the little package in my cigarette pack at that time. And so I got my back up and I ran, and I had probably 20 cop cars trying to narrow me down. So I didn't have a choice. I had to stop. And needless to say, I stayed in jail for a couple of days and got released out on bond and went right back to the same chaos. Uh, it, you know, that that drug is so powerful that it will take everything from you. From your livelihood, mostly your mind, your family, every material thing you have in your life, your children, your relationships, the love you have for yourself, the love you have for others, um, because you will lie, cheat, steal, manipulate, do whatever you got to do to make sure that you're okay or that you can get that next fix. And that whole manipulation thing comes in so many different dynamics and so many different aspects that you will manipulate anybody. You will manipulate your kids to thinking you're going to be there. You will manipulate the utility companies that you're going to pay your bills. You will manipulate your family. All my other bills are paid, but I would call dad and say, "Hey, the gas bill's 180 when it's really only 80." And he would give me the $180. And then I would take that with the other 100 I got and go get enough to get, to be able to sell, and I could get high for free for the next week. There's a lot of situations like that through the process of working a recovery program that I've had to dig deep to think about all the little white lies that I told.
I'm thinking about your white lies about as you were a child and you were watching your dad kind of show you how to manipulate and lie, and you're catching what he's doing rather than what he's telling you to do. And so now it's 30 years later and you're doing these exact same things that you saw him doing as a kid.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Okay, so you get out of jail, 38 years old, go back to exactly the reason you got busted in the first place. What happens after that?
It calmed down for a little bit, and I was homeless, and so my Aunt Teresa, um, said I could come live with her, and so I was living up with her. And at that time, my dad was living there, and he was, because of his alcoholism, was slowly deteriorating on his health, and eventually became an amputee because of his diabetes from his alcoholism. And so I was living there with them, and I got in trouble, and I got a smack on the hand. I didn't get in any major trouble because it was my first offense. And the same thinking, keep in mind that on this first offense, all through growing up, I always had family, friends, or so forth that were attorneys that would get me out of stuff. And there was a couple of attorneys that I would say that hung more towards the black sheep squadron side of things. They both had some pull with Wyandotte County, Kansas City, Kansas. When it came down to this, the same attorney, was like, "What are you doing messing with this stuff? Why can't you stay with the old stuff?" Which he was talking about cocaine, because he was one of my biggest buyers when it came to any time that I was able to get my hands on some of that. I would sell it to my attorney because he loved it.
Man, okay.
And at that time, I think he was dating one of the prosecutors for the same county. And things always worked out in my favor. Let's just say that. And every time I get in trouble, I'd get a slap on the wrist, or here, pay this fine. We'll get you out of it. Just keep your nose clean. Yada yada yada. And after a while, when it came to getting a meth case, that didn't really work out too much in my favor. But I was still able to manipulate and get the slap on the wrist. They gave me Senate Bill 123, which was, first time meth offense, and 18 months intensive supervision and probation, and had to go to classes, treatment, and so forth. And I actually did very well during that time period, even though I was still using. And how I passed UAs at that time, I don't know. I shouldn't have. And I just played the part just to be able to get through that. And they actually released me after 15 months because I was doing so good. Like I said, I was a smart kid, and I knew how to do the bare minimum. We call that the BM, doing the bare minimum, and it eventually caught up with me. One time I was walking in Leavenworth County, leaving one dope house, going to another dope house, and I was in a high profile relationship because the girl I was with was also a dealer. They were watching everywhere I was going. And of course, when you're in that mindset, you think the feds are always watching. And I mean, that's the inside joke is, the people that are high are always peeking out the blinds or looking up in the trees or
Right. Paranoid.
doing, getting rid of the cell phone, going buying another one because the feds got it tapped and everything. And,
You probably didn't have cameras at that time like they're so easy to have now.
well, yeah, and actually, yeah, we did have a few cameras on a couple of the houses that I had, and I can't tell you how many what we call shadow people that I'd seen running across the yard in those cameras, but there was really nobody there. And that was just more the continuous insanity that came along with this. One day I was walking in between the houses. I heard the hum of brand new rubber tires coming up behind me on the street, and lo and behold, there was two detectives that pulled up, and they in turn, arrested me because I had some other warrants from speeding, driving on suspended, and other stuff adding up. Plus, they'd heard about property I had that came from burglaries, and I had a loaded weapon on me, and some dope, and that didn't go over too well with them, and so they ended up charging me separately on those, even though I had them together. And the detective, looked at me when we were sitting in the interrogation room. He's like, "You are better than this, and I don't know what you're doing." And he said, "I got to tell you now that because of the possession and the burglaries that we're charging you with, because of the possession of property that you had that came from those properties, you're looking at 12 years." And he said, "I'm going to point something else out to you." And he took the 6 shells I had loaded in that 357, and he laid them on the table, and he put one down at a time, and he said 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. He said, "There's 30 years on top of the 12 you're looking at. So you tell me what you want to do." And I said, "I'm done. You keep them. You can keep those shells." He said, "Well, I'm going to keep them, and I'm going to keep them here in this baggie. And I know you're probably going to get bonded out." And at that time, I didn't know, but I soon found out that my bond was $250,000, and I was facing 42 years. And he said, "Between the time you get bonded out and the time that you get sentenced, what you do in that time period is going to be the deciding factor of what I'm going to do with these shells." Because I was already a convicted drug felon.
What year was
And
this that this was taking place?
I was 42, and I went and sat in jail for a while, and I knew that he had that stuff lingering over my head. And eventually, over the next couple of months, sitting in Leavenworth County Jail, my bond finally got reduced to 7,500. My attorney that I found that was willing to take on my cases. She said, "Well, you got 5 cases, and you're looking at 5,000 per felony, and whatever your bond's going to be." And I had some money put back, and I had a little over $30,000 put back that I'd made, and I'd blown a lot of it, into casinos and this and that, and everything that went along with that lifestyle. And so that 32,000, whatever it was that I had put back, had to give 25,000 to my attorney and $7,500 to my bondsman. And I believe it was actually around 34,000 because it cost me 32,500. So I told my dad, hang on to the rest of that money because I was probably going to go do some time, and I wanted to have some money on my books when I got there. The day I got released from the jail, I didn't even go home with them. Which I can imagine what was going through their minds when they just got me out of jail and were picking me up from Leavenworth County Jail. And I walked to the NA hall, Narcotics Anonymous Hall in downtown Leavenworth. And actually, a guy that I used to manufacture meth with was sitting in there, and he had 4 years clean and sober. And I was like, wow, if he can do it, maybe I can. And
Wow. So that
so
was like the immediate inspiration or hope as soon as you walked in the NA hall?
Yeah, absolutely. And he was sitting there having a cup of coffee, and he was like, "Well, looky there. I was wondering when you were going to walk through that door." And I was like,
That's awesome.
I told him, I said, "Shut up. I need a sponsor." And so we sat down and we talked, and he told me if I read the first, 164 pages in the book, and gave him 90 meetings in 90 days, that he would sponsor me. And so I did, even though being released, they didn't come with something simple. They had me on community corrections, they had me on probation, they had me on bond supervision, and I had to report to all three of those every week for 11 months until they sentenced me, which means I had to give a UA every time I went in to see all three of those. And it was three UAs a week. It cost me $10 every time I went in there for 11 months, and I never had a dirty UA. I never missed an appointment. I had a job. I was going to treatment and working, 32 hours a week, and still managing to do around 100. I think I did 128 meetings in 90 days.
Wow.
And the 90 and 90 wasn't enough for me because as addicts, our minds will wander. And there were several times that I had to go, sometimes twice a day. So that's what I would do. I had to do whatever it took. Whatever it took, I had to do something.
So when you were
So
out and going to these meetings, did you go see any of the friends that helped you get into this position? Any of your old acquaintances?
periodically I would run into them, and I really had to learn the whole aspect of how to say no. I did for a while, and actually at that time I had got enrolled into Pinnacle Career Institute and was going to school to be a wind turbine technician, because I still, even at that point, even though I was clean and sober when I started that school, uh, was maintaining and doing what I was supposed to do and going to see my POs, going to court, doing everything I needed to do, and got into school and was a straight A student all the way through the whole school, and actually helping tutor people in the class. And about my 10th month in the program, was a 12-month course, and about my 10th month, I had picked up meth again. And I can't tell you how fast everything just disappeared.
Wow.
Everything I'd worked for, and I managed to pull myself right back out of it and not have a dirty UA and not do any of the other stuff that came along with that, because for some reason I woke up and I was like, look, I can't do this. Well, I had already lost my schooling because I missed so many classes in like a couple of weeks, and they told me I'd have to start over. So I, in turn, had just been able to barely maintain, and we're going back to meetings and the sponsor, and hadn't even told him at that time. A few months later, it came time for my sentencing, and because of the progress I'd made and because of the accomplishments I'd had, and not missing any classes, working and having a sponsor and working the steps, and getting through everything at that time, I had a lot of people in the courtroom that day for my sentencing, and there was just some kind of presence in the room. The judge and the prosecutors were constantly talking, and I had people there to support me that day. And even the detective had that bag of shells in the back of the courtroom in his shirt pocket. And they had seen that I had done really good for that 11 months. And so they decided that, I was going to go do some time, but they weren't going to be tacking everything on as dramatically as I thought it was going to be. It turned into, they saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself, and they wanted me to get help. And so my sentencing reduced from 5 37-month sentences to, they ran up concurrent to 37 months total. And that was like a blessing.
Right. That's a lifetime.
Going from 42 years to 37 months instead of 5 37-month back-to-back sentences, running them all concurrent. And the judge count my blessings, because he doesn't see this very often, and he was going to go along with it. And so they ended up hitting me with 37 months, and they took me downstairs into the jail. And keep in mind, I had a best friend of mine, Brian, that was out there, and that I'd grown up with all the way back to the biker days in my dad's bar up till then. And I had been I was out for that 11 months. I was going and picking him up, taking meetings with me. Uh, Taking and running with the whole recovery aspect and going to these recovery events, and I'd go pick him up and take him. I was picking him up from stores, from trap houses, from on the street corners to wherever he was. And, it kind of sank in on him, and to where he was really starting to come to meetings on his own. And I wanted it so bad, and I wanted him to have it because that was like one of my best friends in the world, and like a brother to me. They took me downstairs for the sentencing, or after the sentencing, and when they took me downstairs, I was down there probably about a week and a half. And Brian's dad worked at the jail, and they actually came in and handed me a book. After count one night, he knocked on my door, and they passed a book in to me, and it was a book from his dad and his mom. And there was a note inside of the NA book that I bought for Brian, and they were giving it back to me. I was like, okay, cool, because I got an NA book, and inside that book was that note, and it said that we love you and we think of you as one of our own, and we hope that at least one of you can get something out of this. And the note didn't really resonate until I read the bottom of it, and it said that they were having Brian's funeral next week, and he had overdosed.
I'm sure that hit you pretty hard.
My world crashed for a moment, and the resentments that I had, because I was learning in NA about a higher power, and all through my addiction, my higher power was the substance, the girl, the money, the lifestyle, the social dynamic, any way I could use, drink, any different way that was possible. That was always my higher power. And I think that was the first night that I'd actually, after reading that letter, that I dropped on my knees in my cell by myself and prayed. I was praying to something that I hadn't even encountered and didn't know about yet. I dropped to my knees, and I was a mess. I was bawling, and I put my head down and my hands together, and just started to pray. And why is this? Why did you let this happen? I don't know what it's going to take, and I want to live. And if you can hear me now, I promise, and I make a promise to you and myself, that if you could take the wills and the wants and urges to use away, I promise you I'll never pick up again. And they talk about the spiritual awakening, and that's the first time that I think, honestly felt that, because it felt as though a blanket of warmth had just kind of wrapped around me while I was knelt down. And at that moment, I felt like everything was going to be okay.
It was like you talk about the land of 10,000 projects, and you were trying to fill that hole inside of you with all of that stuff at that time, and it was making you feel good for an hour or so when you got those things. But then now you had this hole inside of you, and this blanket that wrapped around you was filling that God-sized hole inside of you.
Absolutely. And it was really scary, because I couldn't grasp the concept of what was going on, but I just knew that my pain and my sorrows and those urges and wants to use had really just diminished to nothing. And I felt the presence of inner peace, and the only thing I could think of was that there's got to be something out there greater than myself, because I woke up that next morning and wasn't thinking about anything negative, didn't have no thoughts, and it wasn't having any thoughts of using peace and acceptance. And that was kind of an equivocal moment for the driving force of where my life started to change that moment. And I just became very open-minded and willing and accepting. And I was very grateful. I mean, I don't know how people can be grateful to do 37 months in prison, but I was so very grateful. And
Did you tell anybody about this at the time?
at the time, no, no, I just accepted it. There was really, well, there was nobody for me to tell because, you're in a cell by yourself. And I had 2 to 3 more weeks of waiting on a prison bus to come pick me up. And first time going to prison, of course, I was nervous about that, not knowing what I was getting myself into because I'd only ever done county jail time. And what was most puzzling to me, though, was they gave me that book, which is a hardback book. And I know I'm getting ready to go to prison and they're going to take it because that's what they do. They get through all your stuff. They take big combs and toothbrushes and hardback books because things can be made out of those. And my aunt had brought me up a Bible and I had an NA book. And so for the next 2 to 3 weeks, that's all I did was read scripture and read from the NA book because I had to keep in my mind the concept of there's something out there greater than myself. And if all these people in the back of this NA book are sharing their stories, then that's the stuff I wanted to read. I wanted to know how they did it, what they went through, how they were able to accomplish where they're at, get to where they're at and accomplish things to get to that point. And everything in that book, in the NA book, reflects back on you having a higher power, whatever that looks like to you. But then again, my higher power at that time, I was uneducated about it, but I had my Bible to refer to, and I could read through scripture and read that book, and I could coincide with the different things I was reading in both books and see where they actually pieced them together um, with the different stories or the different situations, and I could cross-reference those. And things just as long as I kept my mind busy with the scripture in my Bible and my NA book, that things just generally tended to get a little better every day. And so, the prison bus came and picked me up, and when they check you out and they check you in out of all these different institutions and go through it every time. And they had taken me to the check-in where you go do your evaluation, which was El Dorado Supermax in Kansas. And you got to go there for your intake and evaluations, mental health evaluations, and drug counseling evaluations, and everything. And when I was going through that, when I got there during my intake, and they were like, "What can you tell us about you, so we know how we can help? You're going to be here for a while, so let's get you into some programs and so forth." And I told them, I said, "Well, the one thing I do know is that I'm a drug addict. And if I don't get some help or I don't learn a new way to live, because when you're getting high, you're thinking about all the things that you want in life that you can't have, which included my relationship with my parents, my kids, my grandbabies, living a normal life. Why can't I just live a normal life? Something had to change. They actually held me there in El Dorado a little longer than they did some of the other inmates, and I probably because I had points. When you get evaluated, you get a points level, and if you're at a high points level, which I was because of the people I associated with, and the gun and the drugs and everything else, um, they kind of classified me in as
You were more of a threat.
yeah. So my police weren't going to drop it down until I got sent off to one of the camps, and they ended up sending me to Hutchinson, Kansas. And my son, my, which was 20 at that time, he had already done 3 years in prison. He went to prison when he was 17, and lo and behold, they get me to Hutchinson, and one of the first inmates I ran into out of that whole prison encampment behind the walls was my 22-year-old son. And that was a punch in the gut, because when I got to El Dorado, I was 11 months clean and sober. When I got to Hutchinson, I had already celebrated my year in prison of being clean and sober. And then I ran into my son, and he's trying to get me hooked up with all these people that are in control of all the bad things in the prison.
Oh, wow.
And I'm trying to bite my tongue and tell him I don't want that. I don't want to live that way anymore. And he somewhat, respected that, but he didn't bother not telling any other people that I knew that were in there from my past that I was there. And everybody knew me from what I used to do. So when I was up in the cell house, people always get kites, a little piece of paper that say things on them, or have stuff inside of them that go from one cell house to the other. And I was getting these little pieces of paper with coke, with K2, with marijuana, with meth, with crank, with pills. It was more readily accessible when I was locked up than some weeks out on the streets.
Wow.
And these guys, I was in a 5-man cell, and all these guys were all getting high, but they had little Debbie snack cakes, they had body wash, they had all this stuff because they'd been in there for a while, and they were able to level up to where they could buy stuff off of the commissary or the canteen, and every time someone would come in, I'd go, here. I had a little clear radio headset because everything you get in prison is clear plastic, clear TVs, clear fans, so you can't hide stuff in them. And
Right.
so I had a fan that a guy gave me. I had my little clear radio headset, and I had my NA book in my study Bible. And so I would put my headphones in and find whatever radio station I could just to be able to get through that moment because it was right there in my hands. And I would give it to those guys because they weren't at the point where I was, where I didn't want it anymore. They still wanted it.
That's amazing. You just pass these drugs off just to get them out of your presence.
Just to get them out of my presence.
Wow.
And they were like, you sure? And they call me Pops or Taz, which was my street name. And they say, you sure, Pops? You don't want this? I'm like, no, take it. But you got a box of Little Debbie's down there. And I would really like to have a box of Little Debbie's. And he's like, here, just take it. So became somewhat of still manipulating, but still getting what I want by stuff that was coming to me that I didn't want, and I was still getting what I wanted. So that lasted for a little bit, and then I became eligible to go to work for a kitchen, and a little time passed by, and so I had to pack in, pack out, and transferred from maximum, behind the walls to medium, and then eventually the minimum camp. And no matter where I turned in there, I knew somebody, and somebody knew me from the streets. But in some instance, I made it very clear that I didn't want to do anything. I would go to church when I was in behind the walls. When I got to medium, they had Narcotics Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous classes that you could take, and I had signed up for the substance abuse program while I was in there, and another class called T4C, Thinking for a Change. It was a cognitive class. And so I'd signed up for those. And when I was at medium, I had to be there for a little bit before they would allow me to start the class because it's a 16-week course. And so I waited a couple months, and then eventually my turn came to be accepted into this class. And I went into this class, and these two guys that were there that led the class were from a substance abuse program called SAC, and it's a substance abuse center of Kansas. And they were peer mentors that talked to people regularly about addiction and overcoming addiction and so forth. And they were both former users and abusers and alcoholics themselves. And that's what I needed. I needed to hear this stuff from people that had walked in my shoes at that moment. And they shared their stories with us. And then we got into some step guide work and doing some classes and homework assignments and role playing, which I was not. I don't think anybody still was a big fan of it, but I got into the role playing. And once I got into it, it became a little bit fun because we were talking about real life situations, except the material things weren't there in front of us, and we didn't have to worry about the triggers from that aspect. But the situations that they would bring up about, let's say you get out and you go to a gas station and you run into somebody, and they know you just got out, and they give you a pile of dope to say, here's a come up, don't worry about it. You always treated me good in the past. Just remember me in the future. Being able to say no and learn how to deal with that situation and be able to walk away clean and serene and know that you're not going to get high tonight was a challenge. And that was some of the situations we would role play with to prepare us for the street team. But being able to handle things in a love, caring, concerned manner, but in the same instance, be responsible and let people know where we stand when it comes to being clean and sober. And that one of those situations actually happened when I got out, and thankful for that class that I took, because those guys taught me how to be able to handle those uncomfortable confrontations, because you never know where it's going to come from, when it's going to happen, who it's going to be, but yet, what is your response going to be? Are you going to take it and go use and end up right back here, or are you going to maintain and stay on a positive path and get your life together and live?
So you were putting the foundation, kind of building the foundation for when you got out and doing everything that you could while you were in prison there, because you knew you couldn't get out any quicker, but you were kind of prepping your life for when you did get out.
Right. What else did I have better to do than play spades and pinochle with a bunch of guys that are in there for life?
So
I might as well do something positive with my time.
So how long did you end up spending there?
Just under 29 months.
Okay, so you were supposed to do 37, and good behavior got you out in 29?
Good behavior and graduating the substance abuse program gave me some time back, and the T4C class that I took, it gave me some time back. There was rewards for your actions in there, whether they were positive or negative. And that's how I learned about that whole aspect. And then some laws had changed right before I got out, which I ended up getting about another 3 months back because of the drug laws that had changed. And so they ended up kicking me out 3 months earlier than I was planning on. And I didn't know what to do, because I wasn't at the point where I was a month before I get out making preparations to get out.
What year was it that you got out?
That was 2015, July 15, 2015.
Okay.
And I didn't know where I was going to go. I didn't know what I was going to do. When I took that class the year before I got the minimum, at that time they didn't have that other Oxford house there in Hutchinson, Kansas. And so here they threw this on me that, hey, Lance, hey, Whitney, your time's up. You got to go over and meet with these people. And I get over there and they tell me that I'm getting out next week. And I'm like, what?
I don't know what to do.
What am I going to do? And so I went in behind the walls to go sign this paperwork and talk to these counselors. And when I was at minimum, I was eligible for work release. So I was going, able to leave the prison and ride the city bus, go to downtown Hutch, and go to work at Chili's restaurant. And so I worked at Chili's for almost a year. And so I had a job when I got released, but I didn't know where I was going to go or where I was going to sleep and what I was going to do. I knew that I wanted to go to NA meetings again, out, but I had to find those. And I went up and signed the paperwork, and I walked out there and I looked at the corrections officer that was transporting me back and forth. I said, hey, the counselor's office is right down here for the drug addiction class. Can I go down there and say goodbye to him? And he said, yeah, let's go. So we went down there, and my two counselors were sitting in there, and they said, you're getting out? I'm like, yeah. And he's like, well, where are you going to go? What's going on? And I'm like, I have no idea. I don't want to go back to Kansas City because I'm not ready. One of the counselors said, hey, take this application. He said, they just opened up a new Oxford house here in Hutch, and I know they got openings, so why don't you fill that out and get it over there to them? Well, I'm being released in 2 days, and I don't know how I'm going to get the application through the mail over there to them. So me, still being early in recovery, still having some manipulative ways about me, had convinced the CO that I needed to get this application over to the other side of Hutchinson to this house to get the application turned in, and then he could run me right back to the prison. And so he took me from behind the walls. He said no 3 times at first, but me being the addict I was, convinced him that, and I was wholeheartedly trying to convince him because I still wanted that change, but I was manipulating him for something positive.
Right.
Change. And he actually took me over there, and I showed up, and the guy answered the door, and he's like, whoa, what's going on here? And I said, hey, I'm getting out the minimum unit right now, and I'm getting out in a couple of days, and I need someplace to go. I'm clean and sober, and I want to stay that way. And I don't know what this is about, but it's something different. And if I got to do something different, then I got to do it. And I said, I heard about your program. I just read up on it real quick. My counselors at the prison told me I need to get into your house. And he said, well, our interviews are on Sundays, but man, this ain't how we do things, but I'll talk to the other guys in the house and see if we can do an emergency interview for you. And I was like, that would be awesome, man. I get, this is on like the 13th, and I'm getting released on the 15th. And so I managed, when I got back, I called my mom, told her what was going on about this Oxford house. I don't know what it is. I just know these guys are clean and sober, supposedly. And I hope it's not a cult, And so my mom said they'd be there to get me. And I told them, I said, I'm supposed to call this guy, and he's going to let me know if I get an interview. And I called. They said, yeah, that I could be there Friday, and they would actually all be there to do an emergency interview. Well, I got out on the 15th, so my mom, my son, and my dad would come and pick me up from the prison, and we went and stayed at a hotel for a night and a half, and went to that interview. And I had to sit in front of 15 other guys in a 16-man house and have them interview me and get very uncomfortable about who I was, where I came from, and what I intended to do about it. And with that, they asked me some other questions. Do I have a girlfriend? Do I have anger issues? All the stuff you want to know about somebody doing it during an interview process. So I went and sat and they said, okay, we're going in the other room. We're going to talk about you behind your back. And it takes 80% of the vote of the members that live here to be accepted into this house. And I'm like, okay. And, I thought, I had a great story. There's no way they're going to turn me down. And so they called me back in there, and they said, well, man, you got to get 80% of the vote to be accepted, like we told you. And unfortunately, you didn't get that. And then he paused for a minute. He said, but you got 100% of our vote, brother. Welcome home. And them guys, every one of them, every one of them guys stood up and gave me a hug and told me, welcome home.
How did that feel? Very shortly before you were told that you were getting out of prison, you were probably pretty scared about that. And this Oxford House thing just completely fell into your lap. And now you were being accepted by 16 guys.
I was being accepted because of who I was. I mean, that acceptance meant more to me than anything in the world. And for guys that don't even know me, but just heard about my story, told me, brother, you're just like me, and you deserve a chance. And that's the reason we accepted you, because you want change, and we think you and your personal experience will be a great attribute to other people coming in behind you in this house.
So how long were you at this house?
I was at that house for only 6 months, but because I was there 2 weeks and they made me treasurer of the house. They have a role. They have a president, a secretary, a treasurer, a comptroller that monitors the rent. They have a chore coordinator, which is the most feared person in the house, because if they're doing room checks or you're not doing your chore correctly, that means that you're probably not handling your other affairs in your life properly either. And they are about change. When we get into recovery, we change all aspects of our lives. And if your room is clean and then your room 2 weeks later is a mess, and they can tell something in your behaviors, then they can tell something's going on with you. And so they, taught me out the gate about responsibility and accountability, and about being true to my word. If I say I'm going to do a chore twice a week, I better do it. If I say that I want to live here and be responsible, then I need to keep my room clean. I need to have a job. I need to go to meetings. I need to have a sponsor. I need to work steps. I need to not drink and use, and attend a weekly meeting once a week. And I have a voice in the house, because our houses are ran democratically. Being accepted and being told I have a voice and I have a vote resonated with me like you wouldn't believe. And I thought, this really isn't all that bad. And so I read the manual like they asked me to. I got off orientation period in 2 weeks instead of 30 days because my rent was paid up. I did my chores. I kept my room clean. I already had a job at Chili's. I was paying my rent on time. I wasn't drinking and using. I was going to meetings, working a recovery program, and they decided to let me off orientation period in 2 weeks. And that was probably the best thing that ever happened to me. And so I stuck that out, and I held the treasurer position for 6 months. And about 2 months into that treasurer's position. They liked the way I did the books on a 16-man house with paying the bills. I make sure, the bank deposits got to the bank, paying all the utilities, paying the rent. They liked how my books were kept and they were to the penny. And they said, we're going to open a new house. How would you like to be a part of opening a new house? I was like, I'm in. I'm in. I would love that. Plus, that meant I got to have a single room instead of a 3-man room. So, just the rewards from doing something positive, like learning a new position and learning more aspects of recovery and the R's that we have in the house. We call them the 3 R's. It's recovery, responsibility, and replication. Because if you're being responsible and working a recovery program, then that naturally replicates to the people coming in behind you and the people you live with. And if they can see that that is going on in your life, then that stuff just naturally bleeds over in everybody else. And because you have something they want. They're doing recovery and they want what you got because you seem to be getting your stuff together and you seem to be happy and you seem to be living with good morals and ethics and believing that you can stay clean and sober. And so, they asked me, and I said, yeah, I would love to open a new house. So I went over and opened up a new house, and I stayed there for almost 16 months at that new house, which is only 5 blocks away from the house that I got accepted into on my first house. And we filled that house right up. During that next 16 months, I had held the president spot, the comptroller, and they asked me to be the chapter treasurer, the housing services guy, the person that goes around and makes sure all the houses are holding accountability and running the same as all the houses are supposed to run. And then I became vice chair of the chapter that oversaw all the houses. And, there was just so many new things that just kept compiling up on each other. And this is all new to me because of everything I've ever known in my entire life. But learning how to do the normal things, the things that are normal to other people, but clean and sober.
Right. So at this point, it's 2016 going into 2017. How long have you been sober then?
I am coming up now. My sober date is 4/14 of 12.
Of 12. Okay. So you had potentially been 5 years when you were in this second house. So in your life, you're showing the 3 R's and you're able to replicate this. So we're fast forwarding to 8 years now to the present time. You're still replicating all of this, right?
Yeah, I actually, in 2017, I was ready to move out. I'd been in the houses for 22 months. I wanted to beat that part of the 18-month motto that they have is if you stay in the house 18 months, you have an 80% chance of staying clean and sober for the next 5 years. And from what you can establish and what you gain through living in a house, learning how to manage household bills and buy groceries and keep the house clean and maintain your recovery at the same time, and in turn had led me to the point where I was ready to move out. And they say when you're ready to move out to stay another 6 months. Well, I didn't consider that at that point because I had already I stayed 22 months, even though they said I need to stay 18. And then I met some people down through the process of living in the houses and going to Oxford House events. And so I moved out for a couple months with some friends of mine, another alumni from an Oxford House and another friend of ours from the Recovery Hall. And we went to meetings together and we were doing all this. And then I heard that they were having a position come open in Kansas City. And at this time, I had stopped working at Chili's and was actually working at the treatment center that did the program for me while I was in prison. I became a peer mentor and a certified recovery coach. And so I was working at this treatment center, and the position for Oxford House Incorporated was part-time, but I was working full-time with benefits as a recovery coach through the Substance Abuse Center in Kansas there in Hutchinson. My goal was to have 5 years clean and sober before I even thought about coming back to Kansas City because I wanted that stability and that platform underneath me. That way I knew I had the tools and the people to call upon if I ever got confronted with a situation that was uncomfortable or ever thought about relapsing. And I felt pretty good at this point. And I applied and they hired me. They told me I was hired for Oxford House Incorporated for the part-time contract here in Kansas City. So I moved back up here, and I was working full time for Heartland Radix, still being a recovery coach with like 30 to 50 clients at any given time up out in Topeka, Kansas, and starting to rebuild. I came up here, and they had 12 Oxford houses here in Kansas City, and I had to shut down 7 of them because they was using going on. Nobody knew where the checkbook was. The houses were just distraught. I mean, they were terrible houses, and people overdosing, bills not being paid, landlords not knowing what to do. So I took the 5 strongest houses I had and offered anybody in those other houses the opportunity to move into one of the houses to learn how to do things the right way. And we were going to be retraining, restructuring, and re-educating people on the manual and the processes that I was taught. Because in Hutch and Wichita, we had some really strong areas when it came to Oxford House. And we had a really good system in place because we followed the model and the system of operations that was put in place in front of us, because it was all written down and established years before we were even thought of, and it worked since 1975. And so I I think probably 2 people moved over from all those houses I shut down, and everybody else ran because they were high or drunk or
Didn't want to be involved with recovery.
Right. But yet I was getting so much positive feedback and a lot of positive things happening from working for Oxford House with the people that in the 5 houses that I had made believers of, we can do this and we can make change and we can make this thing bigger than ever. And they took that to heart. I got some investors that I met and some real estate people, and we're able to get them onto the concept. And one of my landlords had already had a couple of houses. He's in recovery, and so he had a house up here before I even got up here, and he knew more about being a landlord for Oxford than I did. So he taught me a lot, and we established a really good relationship. And I started opening up houses in 2018, and as of today, I got 28 houses in Kansas City, and I got 12 in St. Louis.
Wow.
And now, because of the growth we've had, we actually have 57 houses statewide.
Oh my goodness.
And people are thriving. We got over 600 people in the houses and staying clean and sober. I got men's and women with children's houses, girls that are getting their children back in their lives from state custody or relatives or what have you, that they start getting overnights, and then they start getting weekends, and then they eventually gain custody of their kids. And I can't tell you how grateful I am. I can never make all the amends to everything every wrong I ever did. But as long as I know that me and my higher power, God, and my recovery program and my ambition and drive keep going the direction we're going, I'm going to keep continuing to save lives one bit at a time. That is part of me living and working in my amends every day. My recovery program has not only taught me how to live clean and sober, but how to deal with people and meet them on their level and take them by the arm, by the hand, and not push them or guide, but walk with them through the path of recovery, and try to get them to where, they can find their higher power, and get them involved with not only the whole idea of just living in a house because it's cheap rent and going to the meetings just because I'm supposed to, but actually learning how to change all aspects of their life.
The heart change.
The whole thing. Yeah, the whole positive aspect of living and breathing and being a part of recovery.
I hope people get out of this podcast today that just like years ago, you got out of jail and you wanted something different, but you didn't know there was meetings or people to help you in that. And now this is maybe 15 years in the making that you're here today, and you have all these successful houses that you did not know at one point that there was something different. And now you're living every single day saving lives with these houses and showing previous addicts or previous people that were incarcerated that there's potential, there's hope, there's something different in the future for you.
There is. There absolutely is, and I actually was able to get up and get my Bible, and my bookmark was actually sitting in there. It was First Corinthians 13, 4 through 8, which is my favorite part.
Yeah,
And
if you have it open, you want to read that?
yeah, it's um, ver, verse 4 starting. It says, "Love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is self-seeking, and it is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always perseveres. Love never fails, but where the prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled, and where there is knowledge, it will pass away." And that all stems from the moment in Leavenworth County Jail, having that presence that came and wrapped around me that night. I felt love like I never felt before, and because of that, I was able to find a path to recovery that led me to a point in my life to where I could learn to love myself. And through working that that program and laying my will at the feet of his will and just surrendering everything is actually what's helped me to be able to love unconditionally and love myself enough to be able to have appreciation for people that are coming out that were where I once was. Because through this program and through working in a program with a higher power, we are going to love you until you can learn to love yourself.
That scripture you read is probably most known to be read at weddings, but thinking of it in how you're reading it and how God loved you, even though you had failed to meet his standards, like we all do, and you finally felt that warm blanket around you, or that God-sized hole inside of you being filled by his presence when you finally gave everything over. That's a whole new way to look at it, and I think even more a positive way to look at it for maybe people listening to this that are living in a life of addiction or crime, that it doesn't have to be that way, that you are still loved, but it takes a choice. It takes that surrender that a lot of people don't want to give up control of their lives to attain, like you have.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if I didn't have the ability to surrender, then I would never have been able to experience the open-mindedness, the willingness to be able to try to do something I never tried before, and to be open-minded to people with constructive criticism, to see things in a different light than I may be looking at them, and to be able to try to have an understanding that 90% of my problems are me. And until I learn to get out of my own way, nothing's going to change.
I'd love to hear your dad's response to this podcast here and what you're saying and just everything in your life. And I know you said that he's passed, but I know that he's so proud of everything that you're doing today. You said you have 600 people in these houses that you're helping. He didn't know a different way in his life. And then, I know that he's so proud of what you're doing here today. It's just an amazing transformation.
Yeah, and I'm just very blessed to be a part of it. I tell people all the time, even to this day, is that by not living in my will, but living in the Lord's will, the trust that I've established with Him and His guidance every day is not for me to see what the future is, but the ability to understand that I don't know what the future is going to be. I don't know where this path is leading me. I don't know how I'm going to get there, but by putting one foot in front of the other and working a positive program and doing my meditation and my prayers every day, I don't fathom thoughts of using, because if I read something scripture or recovery related, that keeps my mind focused on a different area than what I've been used to. And no matter what, it's worked for almost 13 years. And as long as I keep thinking that way and doing that same routine every morning, and I don't know where it's going, where it's leading me, or where I'm going to end up, but until then, I'm in it to win it.
You are a story of resilience. I'm so happy that you've been here today with us. I know there's a website that people can find vacancies. Do you want to talk on that? Maybe how they can get a hold of you or find a vacancy in a house for an Oxford house?
Yeah, they just revamped our website for the organization. So it's oxfordhouse.org, and you can actually get to the website through there. And if you just want to check it out and see what it's about, it's a great layout that we have. All the information, everything from the person looking for housing to the understanding of the financial aspects of the organization, seeing pictures of the houses, learning where the organization came from, what it's about, what our goals are, and it actually has our yearly report in there. It has people's stories in there, and it also has a vacancy site, and it's oxfordvacancies.com. And you pull down the state of Missouri or whatever state you're looking in, and you can select the county and the gender of the house, and it will give you the name of the house, the phone number, the county, the president's name, the president's phone number, how many beds a house has, how many openings they have, on what day of the week they do their interviews, and when it was last updated. And you have the ability to fill out an application online and pick the counties you want to send an application out. And then I always suggest that people follow up and call the houses to schedule interviews, and they'll let you know what day of the week to be there, and they can schedule an interview and get an opportunity to be able to live with people in a safe, structured environment to continue to work a recovery program.
Well, you're evidence that these houses are life-changing. So I just pray that people can hear this that have been in your situation and are there now, and they can go ahead and take that next step, one foot in front of the other, like you said, and change their future.
Absolutely. Because we're not houses of abstinence, we're houses of recovery. And there's a big difference. There's a lot of sober livings out there that, don't have quite the model or the structure that we have in place. They got to be willing to be open-minded and willing to change all aspects of their lives, because when you get to living in an Oxford house and communal living, there's still going to be challenges. There's still going to be rough days, but you're going to be surrounded by people that are going to support you.
Amen.
And help you get to meetings and find the right way. And, majority of my members in Kansas City actually go to Reach KC.
Okay, so can people contact you through the Oxford House website, or is there another way if they feel led or need to be able to reach out to you?
Yeah, they can reach out to me at lance.whitney, WHITNEY, at oxfordhouse.org. Or feel free to call me at 816-550-4786.
Lance, I just pray that you continue to have the success in these Oxford houses that you have in the past years. I just pray that there's more houses and more people that are able to be helped. And I know that that's your mission. So thank you so much for being here today with me, Lance.
Well, and one more real quick thing. Yesterday morning, my son called me. He's 34 years old, the one I was in prison with, and he called me from a trap house to be my son. And so I went and picked him up yesterday morning and went taking him to breakfast and convinced him to go to detox. And he's on his second day there, and I ran a Bible and an NA book to him today. Just put him in your prayers, and hopefully this time he'll grasp it and understand and get on the path that I've been on. I've been trying to set the example for him, but he could sure use some prayers, and we don't give up on our kids. I keep trying to put one foot in front of the other so he'll follow in those footsteps. It's taken a while, but if it finally clicks one day here soon, then everything I've been doing is worth it.
Well, I can't wait to hear about his recovery in the future.
Well, we're going to pray for it, and I took him a really big recovery Bible this morning.
Well, that would be fantastic, and I know that everybody that listens to this will be praying for your son as well. And I can't wait to talk to you again and hear updates in the future. Wow, what an incredible journey of redemption and purpose. Lance's story is a powerful reminder that no matter how broken our past may seem, God can use it for something greater. If you're struggling, know that hope isn't lost. Transformation is possible through Christ. Thank you for tuning in to Resilient. If this episode has encouraged you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. It just helps us reach more people with stories of hope. Until next time, stay strong, stay faithful, and remember, God's not done with you yet.